welcome all. My name is Jenny Gates Beckman, and I am the Director of Community Engagement and Education at the Jewish Federation of Omaha. And here with me today also is
Annetta. I'm the editor of the Jewish Press and happy to join Jenny.
And this is the second of our series that we are now doing every other month in the year 2022, which I'm still recovering
Lots of twos.
Yeah, lots of twos. Every other month we'll be hosting a local author for a conversation, and we're excited because there's quite an array of authors in our midst, and it's nice to be able to feature community members and have them in conversation. So that was the whole thought behind this series, was really a collaboration between our two areas of the Federation, and you know, allow us to dig deeper into some of our community members' talents.
Also,
I'm not sure I understand.
Siri, I was to Siri.
Siri was thinking I was talking to her. I was not.
Interrupting.
Yes.
How rude. Siri, stop interrupting. So what I was going to say is at the press, we are used to telling stories. This is a very different way to tell stories, and I think it's a great way to tell stories. We are really pleased to have the very glamorous Jan Lund with us today. Author of this, I'll hold it up. Sari and Cass, and I've been living with this book for quite a while now. It goes everywhere with me. Jan is a retired French professor, although I don't know if that is a profession you actually retire from. I think that is in your blood. I am going to ask you to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself and what brought you to this point.
Well, hello, everybody who doesn't know me. I'm from Council Bluffs, and my grandparents and parents were very active in B'nai Israel Synagogue over there. That's where I grew up. I went to Abraham Lincoln High School, and like my character, Sari, I went to the University of Iowa and the Sorbonne, the University of Paris. After college, I moved to San Francisco, where I met and married my husband, Blake Lund, who actually was a former Omahan. Yeah, we didn't know each other here though. And we moved back here when I got offered a teaching job at Brownell Talbot School. In 1978, I took a break to have a baby. And when I went back to teaching, it was at Ralston High School, where I spent 21 years. Every year I taught there, I took my students either to Canada at first and then later to France. And so I had this really very active group of French club and French seniors. And it was really a great experience to do that. I did a lot of volunteer work in those days too. And I was on the board of the ADL, the Omaha Academy of Ballet, the Cathedral Arts Project, the Alliance Française, and I was also president. And I was president of the the Nebraska Association of Teachers of French, the Nebraska chapter. I retired from Ralston and decided to stay home for a year, but then I was offered a job at Creighton as sort of a substitute for one semester, and I stayed 12 years. So I had a second career at Creighton University, where I also participated for 10 years in their Creighton at Joslin series of lectures. And I became a Joslin docent trainer for any of their French exhibitions. And I taught for 3 summers in Paris for Creighton, the art history component of their summer French program. So it was a pretty great second career. And then I retired in 2014 after 40 years in the classroom.
So before we dive into your book, and we're going to get there very soon, you mentioned a Joslin. What were some of those French exhibits? I'm intrigued.
They had, well, they brought in the last one was Art Deco jewelry that I lectured on. That was fabulous.
That sounds amazing.
They had a wonderful exhibition of what they called We Three Kings. And it was art from all the Louis 14, 15, and 16, and lots of educational components to it. I took my students many times to that. I lectured on the life at Versailles. I lectured on the Impressionists. I lectured on anything that tied in with Creighton's, push to acculturate the population.
Do you want to, so I think we do want to hear a brief synopsis of the book.
It's hard to be brief.
I know. It's almost, I mean, really, for those of you who have not seen it, it's almost like 3 books in one. And
Well,
so
it is.
it is a
3 books
trilogy.
in one,
Exactly.
yeah. So it's really the story basically of the coming of age of 2 girls who are sort of thrown together in the dormitory at the State University. And they're from completely polar opposite backgrounds. So this chronicles their friendship that lasts all through college and until the end of their lives. It's self-actualization in the midst of the 60s. And the 60s were a time of seismic change in this country. The war in Vietnam and women's rights, burgeoning civil rights, and all of that against the backdrop of, as we used to say, sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Sari and Cass is a love story. It's a story of love of friends, platonic love, romantic love, the pursuit of love, as Nancy Mitford called it, rejection in love, and the triumph of love. And mainly, though, it's the story of how these characters are trying to learn to love themselves. The story is their quest for, the big questions, the who am I and what am I to make of this life? In the midst of the whole thing, even at the beginning, really, when we're into it, we sort of start seeing a role reversal. Because when it first starts out, Sari is naive and untutored. She's studious and determined, but she's unsophisticated. She grew up in a small town, Iowa. She's
Is that
Jewish.
because she is that way, or is it how she sees herself?
A little bit of both, I think. And she's all of a sudden has this roommate who's older. She's a sophomore. She comes from Chicago, from a very wealthy family. She's beautiful. She's artistic, and she's already been recognized for artistic talent. And so she becomes Sari's role model. That's Cass, of course, Cass Hyde. Becomes Sari's role model in a way. By the end, it's sort of reversed. The things that come out, well, part of the subplot of this is disabilities, and Cass's disabilities are not visible, but they end up being rather self-destructive, and she's really full of self-doubt, and you would not imagine that because she's so, she comes off so worldly wise. But there's plot has various subtexts. Music is one, art, time, memory, sexual orientation, eating disorders. That's what happens to Cass. She becomes the victim of anorexia nervosa. And so part of the story is about the disability of the character in the 3rd book, Polo, and his are visible, and part of them are invisible. Most of us all have handicaps. And so the book deals with that. So of course, the psychology and the motivation and the plot are complex, and the book is long. Like you said, it's a trilogy in 1 volume, but it's accessible. And when you get into it, it's a pretty quick read.
I'm gonna get out of order, Annetta, because
I knew you would.
of course, that's,
Go for it.
I can't do things exactly linearly. Your mention of music as a subplot.
Mhm.
Um,
Subtext. Yeah.
subtext. I noticed something about the chapters. How did you decide to name the chapters and what's the story behind that?
I always knew the chapters would be song titles or works of classical music. And they set the mood for each chapter. I always pictured sitting there with Pandora or Spotify and just playing what's, given at the chapter. One of the main themes in this book is how rock music of the 60s shaped our lives. And everybody calls it the soundtrack of your life. And it was. By the time Sari and Cass are at Iowa, rock music has already become a vehicle of social change. And in the foreword, I quote from Wordsworth, bliss wasn't in that dawn to be alive, but to be young was very heaven. And part of being alive was to be awash in music. And it was very heaven. I put all my favorites in here. The music we loved then, we still love, and we think it's unequal.
Do you have music blaring in the background when you write?
Yes.
That is interesting, because I do. I always have to have music playing when I write, and it creates that atmosphere. I was wondering about, because this is a lot of writing. So you need a lot of songs.
You do. I listen to classical music from London almost 24/7, but I do listen to a lot of rock too. And I listened to all the songs in this book as I was doing it, just to re-up my atmospheric memory. Classical music is also timeless, and a lot of the characters in this book have to do with classical music. And Sari, for example, especially becomes educated and appreciative of classical music in the book. So that's why that plays a role.
All right, I will bring order back, Jenny. So I'm going to the next question. So the book starts in Iowa, takes us to both the small town and the slightly bigger town. And then there's Paris and Chicago. Would you say that the place is almost like an additional character in the story? How important is place?
Place is really important. It defines the trilogy, for one thing. And unlike the characters, who are all fictional in this book, the places are real. And I have fond and strong memories of all of them, and very strong feelings for these places. Obviously, writers are admonished to write what you know, and so that's what I did.
And you mentioned that the characters are fictional. So those of you who don't have the book, I'm going to read, because I really love this line that you put in the front cover page and my glasses. So it says, this book, this is in bold, this book is not a memoir, period. Really, period. It's not, period. So and I know part of that is because anybody who writes a novel, people are going to
In first
assume-
person.
Yeah. So what has the response been to that? Do people see that line in the front and take it for what it's worth? Or do they still come back to you and ask you, so which one are you?
Here's what I say. I stand by my disclaimer.
Fair words, fair words.
Very good.
I just want to remind our audience here that if you have a question at any moment, just pop it in the chat, and then at some point we'll also take questions if you want to raise your hand. So tell us a little bit, like, how important was it for the character of Sari to be Jewish?
Well, it was essential because it's a main plot point of the book. First of all, the reader joins Sari on her journey because the reader's her companion. She's writing the book in first person. And anti-Semitism almost always pops up in this story, in her journey. Sometimes it's covert, and sometimes it lingers overtly. Sometimes it's overt, and sometimes it lingers covertly in her life. There's also a flashback to the Holocaust in France in the section dealing with Polo and his past. And there's a lot of commentary in this book on intermarriage. So the book deals with this idea that mistaken perceptions and assumptions of others can happen, and you can fall victim to prejudice.
Is some of that prejudice within Sari herself? Because I remember specifically the point where she tells Polo not to convert.
Yes, but I don't think that's because she's prejudiced. I think it's because she feels that when you marry someone you've promised to love, honor, probably not obey, but you don't promise to change your soul and your whole person. And she doesn't think that, I don't think she'd mind if he did it, but she doesn't think it's necessary for him to do it.
Okay. I hear that. Do you want to take the next one? Do you want me to?
Sure. I mean, you spoke a bit about listening to music while writing. What else can you share about what writing means to you? How does that look as you wrote this book?
This was a really fun experience to write this book. I had a great time. What happened was I've had this idea for decades, and it's just really a little embarrassing to say that I started writing it in the 80s. I wrote it as a movie script, and I tried to get that produced. It didn't work out. And so when I did this book, I wrote from the early outline that was the script and based on the same story. And when I actually undertook to make this a book, I had to have a block of time. I just didn't have it when I was teaching. And so when I retired, when I was really and fully retired, I sat down. I took 1 year to rework the outline and tweak it and do more research. I took 1 year to write the book. I sat down at the computer at 12:30 in the afternoon usually and got up at dinner time. Sometimes I wrote after dinner too. And I took 3 years to edit it. And one of the pleasures of authorship is that you get to mine the great ore field of your imagination and come up with these lives that you wish you had lived vicariously, but you couldn't. And you might have liked to. And so I just dreamed it up, and it just flowed. It really did come pretty easily.
That sounds really fun.
It was fun.
I'm a little jealous. So a lot of writers talk about this difference between writing with the door closed when anything is possible and nobody knows what you're doing, and then opening the door and letting the world in. How long did you keep the door closed? How long was it just you and your characters?
Well, a pretty long time, although at certain other points I showed parts of this to people. First of all, when I was writing the movie, I had a friend in LA who was a writer, and he let me borrow his agent. And so his agent read my script and they gave me copious notes. They liked the first 50 pages. Unfortunately, it's 200 pages. And they said, move out here because you have to pitch this idea to the producer. I said, I have a job. I have the whole family is on my benefit package. I can't move out there. They didn't really get it that teaching full time. So they're the ones that actually told me to write it up as a novel. So that was in the 90s by the time all that happened, and I didn't have time. So later.
How different is it being a writer from being a teacher?
Well, obviously I can only speak for myself. Writing is fun, and I've considered myself to be a writer since I was 12. I started writing diaries, and I still keep a journal today. So that's been all those years. I started journalism in high school, and I wrote a column. I also wrote a column for the city newspaper in Council Bluffs when I was 17. And
Really, where would we find these poems?
well, maybe in
You and I
the
will talk after.
microfiche.
In the archives, I bet there's a.
I know
Yeah.
a few people who could probably find, that would be really fun to
I
find.
actually have all of them.
Oh. We'll talk.
All the while I was teaching, I was also writing. I was writing poetry. I was writing my master's thesis. I wrote scholarly articles. I wrote magazine features and op-ed essays. And I wrote 1,000 lesson plans. So I've always been writing.
What was your master thesis on, if I can ask?
Oh, you'll like it because Holland is the star. It was about foreign language outcomes in the US versus Europe.
Oh,
So, yeah, Holland's,
that does sound interesting.
Holland is the star, by the way.
As we should.
I found teaching to also be really fun, very creative, and gratifying. You have to love your students to be a good teacher. You have to love and know your material, your subject matter. And you have to be a skilled enough communicator to project both of those in the classroom. Teaching in America is a really hard job, especially now. I won't even get into what's going on now. Really, this country is maybe the only country on the planet where teachers aren't accorded an automatic status. In fact, just the opposite. And it's a scandal. If anybody can tell me a more important job to have in the world than teaching, I don't know what it might be. And I've always thought that teaching was a calling. It was for me. And I taught elementary through adult, but of course, most of my career was high school and college. I loved every level I taught. And I think that I had maybe a handful of unpleasant teaching incidences, but most of the time it was a love affair. Teaching carries a huge time commitment and a huge responsibility that writing really doesn't. I mean, I know some writers are on time deadlines and time binds, but when I sat down to write Sari and Cass, all my time was my own and it was luxurious.
Jenny and I don't know what that is.
That sounds fun. I'm curious, are there certain authors that have inspired you as you've written this book?
Well, yes. First of all, I went to Iowa. So the Iowa Writers Workshop was paramount in my mind all the time. And I studied a lot of literature and French literature, especially. And of course, I love all the canon, seriously. I think Susan Fromberg Schaefer is a writer who influenced me a lot. She was a Boston University English teacher. She wrote the book Anya, and it was just a fabulous example of great writing. I loved Salinger. I loved Marcel Proust. I believe Marcel Proust to be the greatest writer in the 20th century. So, you know, lots of influences and lots more. I love reading biography and, you know, many, many other writers.
When
Virginia
I read
Woolf.
Virginia Woolf, of course. When I was reading your book, there were times when you go into really, really large detail where you don't just tell me what the characters are thinking and going through, but you tell me what they're wearing, where they bought, what they're wearing, what the room looks like, what they had for breakfast. There is no escape for the reader. You are in the story. It's like you are pulled in with every word. Has any other author done what you've done that you know of?
Oh, I'm sure they have. But I really can't compare myself to some of these great writers. But if you read Marcel Proust,
It's just the three of us talking.
Proust paragraphs are one sentence sometimes. And he wrote 1,500 words, and his work was divided into 7 parts. I wrote 500,000 words divided into 3 parts. So yeah, again, I don't compare myself to Proust, but that's sort of what you might want to compare it.
So that is what inspired some of it.
Sort of, yeah. I also felt that I had to show the motivation for what, especially Sari, was going through, because she was so not used to a lot of what you read her doing. So, you know, she was gobsmacked about everything.
I love that word, gobsmacked. That is such a great word. I'm not sure what it means. I mean, I know what it means, but where it came from.
Britain
It sounds like, yeah, that
is British English.
the Brits have the craziest words.
What was,
Go ahead.
can you share a bit about the self-publishing process? Because that's in contrast to our last author, we asked about that publishing process, and it's a particular journey, right? I've heard a
It's
lot about it.
getting more and more prevalent
Yeah,
in the
absolutely.
United States. I guess computers rule. It's nice. You own the copyright, you control the content, and you don't have to convince an editor, a publisher, or agent to accept your manuscript and produce your book. The daunting part of this was how to do it. I didn't know how to do it. And so I took a class at Metro. And that turned out to be a ruse. It was taught by a charlatan who was there to promote her own business of publishing people's books
Really?
for profit, her
Oh,
profit.
scandal.
And so luckily we had 2 friends who have self-published, and one of them, my dear friend from grad school, Kathy Cohen, was kind enough to let me, into the process to pick her brain and figure out how to do it. And
Take a bow, Kathy.
and when I say me, I mean my darling husband, Blake Lund, because he had the computer literacy and the tech skills to understand what she was talking about and really do it. And then I also got very lucky because I had a student at Ralston who I kept in contact with, and he was a wonderful French student and a great artist. And he moved back to Omaha with his family, and I was in touch with him. And I one day asked him if he might want to maybe design the cover. And we had one meeting over lunch where I had a piece of paper scribbled with kind of my idea. And he went to his computer and created this fabulous, I think it's a work of art. And he was very computer savvy too, and he knew how to do the formatting. So we got really lucky. So
It's a good cover.
I really like it, back and front.
I have a question about the prologue. So, and I don't want to necessarily, if there's anybody on the call who hasn't read the book yet, I don't necessarily want to give too much away, but since this is right at the front end of the book, you wrote the prologue as an epilogue.
Mhm.
What made you decide to do that?
We remember that this book is a permutation of the film, and the film's first scene basically is the same scene as the book, and then it flashes back to the rest of the story. And so I sort of did the same thing with the book, only I didn't end it where the film ended. You see almost the ending at the beginning, but not quite. I have 2 more tying up loose ends epilogues at the end of the book. But we do see that, something important happens right at the beginning.
What are there some sound bites, some individual nuggets that you want people to take away from this book? I feel like just listing some of the subplots, it sounds like you had thoughts.
Well, I hope they enjoy the life and times of Sari and Cass and the atmosphere that the book takes them back to those times with. I hope that they can relate to the journey of self-discovery and the, all the different adventures the characters are on. And I think that the reader can become steeped in the atmosphere of the places in the book and the emotional places in the book. So, it's a big kind of a bumpy ride in this book.
It was especially interesting to read it during the pandemic because right now, just all I want to do is go to Paris and go visit for myself, but being able to read about other places when we effectively could not go anywhere it was a great substitute,
Oh, good.
especially with all the detail.
There's a lot of detail, I know. My husband likes to tell me this is not the book I would have written, but you did it, so good on you.
How many times have you been to Paris in your life?
More than 30,
Are you hoping to go back soon?
very soon, hopeful, but not this year. We're gonna go back next year. I live with someone who's dying to get back there. I am too.
Let's hope so. I'm hoping the same thing, a little further north.
Yeah.
Do we want to go over some of these questions that were sent in?
Oh, yeah. Well, I've already covered a couple, but what would you recommend to others who might aspire to write? Any?
Well, I always tell my students and anybody who asks me that it's a great opportunity to expand your emotional story and get it out there, even if you're just writing a journal, or if you want to write a novel, I say do it.
So you're bringing up an interesting point, the emotional dimension of any story, and especially a story like this. I feel, from what I remember from college and all the writing classes and the literature classes, that we don't necessarily spend a lot of time talking about that emotional level. Do you think, and now I've been out of school for a while, do you think that that is slowly changing in education, that we spend more time talking about the emotions in the text?
I think maybe it is. I think that just like with the poetry slams and various other new things that weren't around when I was in school, kids are getting more and more expressive. And I think that all of that is great. The more they do that, the better. I think that students can be taught to write, and they can be given writing, examples, but just the act of doing it is really very rewarding, and can be great. It's hard. It's not really easy, but I think that people are writing more now. I think computers are making it even easier too.
For sure, yes.
I'm curious, a lot of people, it's very easy to think, writing, you can grow, you can hone your writing skills by taking classes and being in school. Can you think of anything that like we as community organizations could be doing to encourage young people or even peers to write more?
Well, I think that the community did do that with the essays on the righteous that we had. I was a judge of some of those, and that was fabulous to have these kids writing about the Holocaust and people that influenced them and inspired them. And that, I think essay contests are great. Lots of them exist. you know, and I think the community could certainly do more of those. I think they could have reading sessions of poetry and slams and that kind of thing too. The J is a perfect venue for that.
I like that.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any more great ideas? Because we'll write them all down.
Oh, let me think about it for a while and I'll let you know.
Jenny may yell at me later because we're kind of, we have too many good ideas.
Well, we don't have to do all our own ideas. That's the thing.
This is
There's a
true.
whole theater department that could help with this. Don't
There
you
you
think the
go.
theater department could take on something like a poetry slam? I think that would be amazing.
We have Jen Tompkins off camera sitting over there.
Nodding.
Poetry slams. Let's do it. I love that idea.
So what's next for you? Do you have big plans?
Everybody asks me if I'm gonna write another book. I'm not. I do have some other book ideas, but I'm a vintage scrapbooker. I scrapbook the old fashioned way and I've been behind since 1996. I have projects lined up like planes coming into O'Hare. So I'm gonna be scrapbooking the rest of my life.
Can you tell me more what it means to be a vintage scrapbooker?
I have never heard those words put together. in
Yeah,
that
well, I mean,
order.
obviously, one
I
could
love
say
it.
you don't go to Michael's and buy out their aisle, so like, tell us.
Yeah, I do.
Or you do.
I don't do it on the computer.
Okay.
I do it on paper.
People scrapbook on the computer.
Oh, yeah. Nowadays, people are not doing what I do. It's too slow and they're taking their pictures from, you know, Facebook and their camera and sending them into places that make the book and send them back to you.
Did you know that?
Actually, yes.
Okay, so I'm old.
Jen has purchased things like
So
this.
I scrapbook for like 1 year after Isabella, my oldest, was born. So Isabella has a scrapbook, Mendel does not. Because after that 1 year, I was done, but I did it. We would go to the craft room
Mhm.
at Michael's, I believe,
Or archivers.
and there were like stickers and colored paper, and it was very labor intensive. I
That's
didn't
what I
know you could
do.
just do it on a computer. Can you also just have other people do it for you? I bet.
You just said, yeah.
Everything's available on Etsy, right?
Yeah.
That is true. I'm staying off Etsy.
Okay, I think we do have a question. I'm gonna try and see it from this distance. All right. So would you talk about your decision to format the book as you did? The tiny print was a challenge for the myopic.
I know. The tiny print was the problem with KDP Publishing, which is Kindle. They have a page limit of what you can put in one volume. And so I didn't want people to have to buy 3 books. And so we just squeaked in the amount of pages we could have. It turns out that if you read the book on Kindle, you can adjust the print, of course, and make it as big as you want. And I'm sorry about the small print for all people my age, but I read it like up here, so it's fine. And as I can't speak to the formatting because I didn't do it, my friend taught Blake Lund how to do it.
Shane, do you want me to read your comment to everyone? Because you only sent it to me. Okay, all right. Because Shane wrote in, Jan and I became friends the first week in the dorm at Iowa. We lived across the hallway. Even though this is fiction, she has such a perfect memory of those early days at Iowa in 1956. 66. I'm like, I can't read the numbers. How did she do it? How did you do it?
Shane's dress plays a big role in this book. I borrowed her clothes all the time. I don't exactly know how I did it, but I will say that without sounding completely ridiculous, I would lay my head down on the pillow at night and all the things would just come back to me. It was like a dream. I dreamt it. So.
Well, I think also the act of writing things down, sometimes it opens up.
And I did have my journals from those days. I didn't consult them really. They were too painful.
I'm just taken aback by your reference to listening to the music and creating an atmospheric memory or
To
encouraging.
re-invoke the atmosphere
Re-invoke.
when I first heard it. And I think we
It's-
all do that, right?
Exactly,
Brings
yeah.
it right back. For Proust, it was tasting the Madeleine. And for me, it was listening to Cream or, the Beatles.
Did you have the same experience with any smells? I feel like smells are supposed to have
Just for
stronger.
Just for Paris, I
Yeah. No, but I do think that sometimes, well, especially art and music, when I look at Matisse paintings, they just make me happy. I can be in the worst mood, but you look at a Matisse and just, I don't know, he just invokes something in me, and the same
It
thing
is
with
kind of
music.
impossible to stay cranky while
Yeah.
looking at Matisse.
Yeah.
We
He's
have-
not even my favorite, but it's just, Jocelyn has a few, and it's just fabulous.
We have one more question from the chat. Have you ever done any writing when you use pen and paper first? And if so, how challenging was that?
Well, I always use pen and paper first. Absolutely. I wrote this book outline in pen and paper on legal pads. I think I wrote the first movie script with pen and paper too. My writing's gotten to be pretty bad, and I've got arthritis, so I haven't done too much lately of it. I used to write copious letters to people, and now no one can read them, so I type. So I used to use pen and paper for sure.
Do you have a favorite pen?
Yes, they tend to all run out though. I keep having to get new ones.
Of course. Well, I want to just give one more opportunity for some questions to be put forth by our participants, but otherwise, this has been an incredible conversation. What about
I have
you?
one more. So what are the chances that someday, and hear me out, you would potentially let us see some of your poetry?
Well, sure. If I can find it, it's in the archives in my house somewhere.
That would be amazing. I would love to read some of your poetry.
Okay, it's not all too great.
Well,
Mark, you don't have any questions?
he just asked the question.
Oh, you just asked a question. I can't see the screen.
You can't see, that's the danger of this text. We need to figure out how to blow it up. But yes, so I wanted to, if it's okay, are you ready to wrap up? I kind of just wanted
I'm
to
ready to wrap, yes.
lend a huge thank you to you
You're welcome.
for joining us today. This has been a wonderful conversation, and I'm excited that it's recorded and we can share it with others. I know we had a few messages, a few people registered even though they couldn't attend, and they wanted to make sure we were recording this. And I'm curious, I would love to see, honestly, I want to see some scrapbooks. We should have a scrapbooking party so that we can, I have many things I need to
And you thought
scrapbook.
this was going to be a one-time visit.
I have scrapbooks galore.
I would love to see some.
Amazing. Well, thank you all for joining us today. Our next author event is in June. We are going to be interviewing Harold Mann.
Harold will do most of the talking, I'm sure. So a very different focus. Harold writes children's books about golfing and golf etiquette. And we're gonna leave you hanging there because
It's
show up and come and hear what he has to say. It's very unique.
absolutely, so that'll be the first day of summer, June 21st.
And we have puppets.
There will be
We have
puppets.
puppets.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much, and have a wonderful day.